Hey everyone, hope you're having a good summer. I'm back for one of these sort of casual conversations about what I've been reading this summer. I know I haven't really been doing a great job lately of posting my dedicated reviews. Part of it is I just, I have to pace myself, and I try not to see making these reviews, these videos as an obligation. I just want it to be something fun. What keeps me going with it is knowing that, it's something I enjoy and something that is a hobby of mine. At the same time, I admit I've been a little bit lazy and not been really on top of talking about the books that I've been reading and that I've, been wanting to talk about, and even have been taking notes while I read with the hope of making videos about them. And given that this is something that I really do enjoy when I do it, I'm hoping to be a little bit more consistent in posting stuff, but we'll see how it goes. I hope you've all been having some good reading summers as well. Let's get into talking about what I've been reading. So first of all, I've been reading a few mystery novels. Maybe not as much as I have at some times in the past, but I've definitely been reading some good ones when I have been reading them. So the first of those was Curtain, the final Hercule Poirot novel by Agatha Christie, which I've been looking forward to for a really long time. I made myself finish all of my backlog of Agatha Christie Poirot reviews before getting to this one, before I allowed myself to read this one. And even then, I waited, probably a month or two, maybe even longer, before finally taking on Curtain, because, I'll talk about that when I do a dedicated review of Curtain, which I definitely will, but I told myself it was that I wanted to make sure that I was in the right mood for it when I read the final Poirot novel. I think some of it, honestly, is that I was just, it's one of those things where you don't want to read the last book because, it's been a big part of my life for 8 years or however long I've been reading the Agatha Christie Poirot books for, and it feels like the end of an era in a way. But really enjoyed that one. Have more thoughts to share on it, but I'll leave that for a dedicated review. After finishing Curtain, I also listened to Poirot and Me, David Suchet's memoir. So Suchet is the actor who played Poirot for 25 years on these TV film adaptations of all of Christie's novels and all of Christie's Poirot novels and short stories. I was a little bit disappointed with this memoir. I guess you'd call it a memoir. I felt like, there's some good stuff in there. I really enjoyed hearing about how Suchet, how he was introduced to Agatha Christie's works, how he was introduced to the character of Poirot, and how he saw, playing Poirot as a huge step in his career and in his goals to be a character actor who really comes to embody the essence of that character. The rest of the novel, or the rest of the memoir, though, it quickly became repetitive, and it felt like, I was really looking forward to hearing Suchet's insights about the different films that he made and what the experience was like of all of them. Which ones were really the standouts for him. And I would have really appreciated even just, if he just picked out a few of his real favorites and really did a deep dive on them and related it to his life, his broader life in some way. But for the most part, it kind of just like the whole book, which is pretty long, like it was like 10 hours to listen to as an audiobook, or 9 hours. It feels like just sort of a CV listing of every performance he's done, not only in Poirot, but like in between Poirot films. And while it is somewhat interesting hearing like about his struggles of, not knowing whether there was going to be another Poirot series and not knowing whether he was going to have employment, like a lot of the stuff in it just feels like digressions. And then talking about the each of the films themselves, like he actually doesn't really have too much to say about each one of them. Like it's like he needs to say something about every single short story and novel that he participated in filming, but he mostly just, out of all of them, he just has to say, like, it was excellent. The people that I worked with were great. You know, it was such a joy to work with them, but you don't even really hear anything about what was a joy to work with them in most cases. Like, there's not really even that many anecdotes that are really interesting. Some at the beginning, like, you know, how he met his driver, are interesting, but all in all, I felt like it felt like a little bit lazy by the, you know, really after making it through the first hour or so of the book, and I think it was a little disappointing. Something that I think Poirot fans or David Suchet fans might still enjoy in its own way, but not something that I really feel like everyone, even big Poirot fans, would necessarily need to read. One other mystery that I really enjoyed this summer was returning to Sherlock Holmes. So last year I listened to, while I was on a vacation, The Sign of Four and A Study in Scarlet, which are the first two novels in which Sherlock Holmes appears. The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, though, is a series of short stories. I think 12 of them total. I think 12, in which Holmes, we really get to see Holmes's character, the types of crimes or mysteries, not all of them are even crimes, that he investigates, how he interacts with Dr. Watson, his companion, and the idiosyncrasies that both of them have. And I really enjoy these short stories. Like, last year when I read the novels, I enjoyed them, but like, I enjoyed the setting of the novels, but like, there was something a little bit disappointing in terms of the pace of them. Like, I feel like Holmes is better suited to this short story format. You know, you get a little bit of the adventure, a little bit of the excitement of what often is a new situation that Holmes is placed in, or just something really odd, like the Red-Headed League, the mystery of the Red-Headed League. A guy comes into Holmes's apartment or consulting room or whatever, a red-headed man, and he talks about how he was hired to be the secretary of the Red-Headed League, and which is a position that is entirely nominal and involves copying the dictionary, but only the people with the reddest hair are invited to apply. And it's just like a very bizarre mystery that is super intriguing, and you can see how this is the kind of thing that if it was dragged on for, say, 4 or 5 hours in the audiobook version, as were these Holmes novellas that I listened to last year, it wouldn't have been quite as, like, it would have dragged. It would have, even if there was a fair share of adventure and twists to it and everything, like, it just wouldn't have had the same impact as it does as this hour-long short story to listen to, maybe 30 pages if you read it in the hard copy. It has this it's the perfect length for Holmes to shine. And on top of that, just the setting, the whole atmosphere, the writing style, the language used, like the British, the old British, mid 1800s style that the characters speak in, very descriptive. It really transports you to the place where these adventures are taking place, which for the most part is in London or in its surrounding areas, but sometimes to further away areas as well. So definitely, if you haven't read Sherlock Holmes before, I would, and if you're interested in getting started with Sherlock Holmes, I would recommend starting with The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes before going to, say, these novellas that were published earlier. They may not be the first chronological Holmes stories, but they really, in fact, they're the only ones that I had been exposed to previously. I actually read some of these stories, I think when I was a teenager, on vacation as well, checked out the book from the library and just, made my way through a few of the stories while I was, while we were driving in the car, and brings back good memories. I can remember why these stories stuck with me. Okay, I've also been reading quite a few classics this summer. Well, I've finished a few. I've finished one, but for the most part, I've actually been more just slowly making my way through some other ones. So I've been still working on War and Peace. Moving along in that, I'm right now I'm about at the end of book 2, which I forget if there's like 4 or 5 books in the whole book. Okay, there's 4 books and an epilogue. So I'm about towards the end of book 2. It's almost halfway through. I don't think I'm quite halfway through yet. I am still not falling further behind this slow read group that I'm trying to catch up with, but still not really closing the gap. The thing about War and Peace is that I really enjoy it, but I often am reading it in sort of bursts where I'll read like a whole part of one of the books, which is like 20 chapters or so over a period of like 2 or 3 days, and then I'll pause or just be busy for a few days and then come back to it and then blast ahead again and enjoy it. And these characters are definitely living there in the back of my mind throughout the last 4 or 5 months or however long I've been reading it. But I still haven't quite managed to steadily increase my speed to get up to the rest of the group, which is fine. I don't have to finish it by the end of the year. It's a journey, and I'm enjoying it. So the point where I'm at right now is the most recent memorable events are when the Rostovs, Nikolai Rostov came home for Christmas. He goes hunting with his family, which is this really beautiful, vivid description of the Russian countryside, which we haven't really seen quite to this extent in the rest of the book. He celebrates Christmas with his family and with Sonia, the girl whom he's pledged to marry. And it's this lovely scene which has this sort of there is this sort of ominous undertone in the background of like there's still a war going on. There are like financial and social considerations and just uncertainty. Like the women in particular, Natasha and Sonia, they're not sure whether the men who have pledged to marry them are actually going to marry them or not. And despite seeming to have strong characters and they're not even sure whether, if they do get married, whether it will be a positive, in the end will be a positive outcome for them or not. So definitely sort of painting the portrait of the perils of both war and the perils of peacetime in the era of the Napoleonic Wars in Russia. Really enjoying the story. I think I like this. I think I've been enjoying it more recently because I feel that now when, we jump from character to character. We've got Pierre Bezukhov, we've got Prince Andrei Bolkonsky, we've got Maria Bolkonsky, who's kind of just shut up with her overbearing father, but wants to go on like a religious pilgrimage or something like that. We've got the Rostovs are just always a joy, full of energy, full of life. Nikolai is our young soldier, full of very impressionable and full of imagination and aspiring to heroism, while also kind of just seeing what happens with this whole experience of fighting in the army. And then Natasha, seemingly this sort of innocent character, but full of just like life and a very strong personality, dancing at the Christmas celebration in a way that just captivates everyone and just like me as a reader just made me feel like I was having so much fun along with her and sort of recognizing the power of these characters and their place in the literary canon and in literary history. So I feel like these characters' stories are really starting to develop in a way that really makes me curious what will happen with them next, and makes me worried for some of them as well. For all of them, I guess, but definitely some of them it feels like there's a bit of foreshadowing of dark times to come, but we'll see where it all goes, and looking forward to it. I'll probably at some point I'll hopefully do a more dedicated not review. I don't know. It feels intimidating to do a discussion of War and Peace just because it's such a famous work that I feel like anything that I had to say about it is, has already been said. But I'll still see what I can do to add something to the conversation, hopefully. Another classic that I have finished is Ernest Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises. So last year, towards the end of the year, I read The Old Man and the Sea, which is a short book and a little bit of a more of like sort of an allegory, or feels like a little bit like I don't know, I wouldn't diminish it quite to like the level of just a parable, but it feels, it doesn't feel quite as expansive or as fleshed out as something like, The Sun Also Rises. Sorry, I don't mean to diminish that work, but it's a different style of work, and honestly not really one that usually is my favorite overall, even though I actually really did enjoy reading The Old Man and the Sea. The Sun Also Rises is maybe Hemingway's most famous or most critically acclaimed work, and also a lot of people just really don't like it, apparently, because it's a difficult work in its way. Like there's not really a deep plot to it. I feel like there is like a narrative flow to it, but at the end of the day, you have these characters, friends, I guess you could call them. They don't necessarily have the most healthy relationship with one another, but they're living through dark times, in psychologically dark times for themselves. They're part of this, what was called, I guess, the Lost Generation. I don't know exactly what that means. I haven't really investigated the full historical context of this, but I have learned that this book, written in the wake of World War I, was really trying to grapple with the fact that these characters, many of them having just returned from the war, wounded both physically and psychologically, or even those who had not been in the war, being wounded psychologically in the sense that, before World War I, there was this sense that, Europe and the West and the world are on a path towards, peace and better civilization, and, that we're on an upward trajectory towards better places. And World War I kind of like threw a wrench in that whole story, because Europe had this brutal conflict, which was also, my understanding is that because of the new technology, the new military technology, it was absolutely brutal and resulted in, countless deaths, in a way that was not quite the same as what we had seen in previous wars, even though they were also devastating in their own right. Just grappling with the after effects of what this means for them. And the characters that we see in the story are, kind of, it feels like they're sort of bumbling through their lives. They're hanging out at cafes in Europe, drinking, talking with one another, fighting with one another, honestly. And in this novel, they go to Pamplona to watch the bullfights and the running of the bulls. And, they kind of have their disagreements, and then they all go their separate ways, in a way that is not necessarily the most satisfying for a lot of readers. Like there's not really a big conclusive ending that you can get excited about or anything. And yet, in spite of that, I enjoyed this book a lot. I can't even put my finger on why I enjoyed it. But it's an example of modernism, I guess. I'm not even sure exactly what that means, having not really been trained in like the history of literature. But I know, for example, that another example of modernism is William Faulkner. William Faulkner's works. Like last year, I read As I Lay Dying, and that was an extremely challenging work for me. I read it with the feeling of like, okay, I'm open to the fact that there is something in here, that there is an importance and a beauty to the unusual to me style of writing that this is told in, and the unusual way that the characters are developed in this novel. And the novel did leave an impression on me, but I just felt like it was, even after listening to some podcasts about it at the end of it, it still felt really inscrutable to me. The Sun Also Rises it still feels kind of inscrutable to me, but not in the same. I feel like there are dimensions of it that I am at least grasping. And even after just reading the book and not hearing anyone talk about it or interpret, this fact that it's in the wake of World War I, which I hadn't quite appreciated on as deep of a level as I think many others have, I still found it, there's something about the style just in Hemingway's way of writing that really is immersive in a way that doesn't really, like, the tone of it is clear. It's not really glamorizing this life of getting drunk at every meal in Paris and then going and watching bulls fight. But there is sort of a beauty in the way that it portrays this in an unconventional sort of way that, just involves, conversations between characters that often sort of meander and reach no definitive conclusion. I don't know. It's hard for me to explain why I liked this, and I feel like I'm sort of not really doing it justice. I'm probably making it sound really dull, but I think it is a book worth reading. And I think it is more accessible than, for me, it was much more accessible than like William Faulkner's writing as a starting place into this modernism genre, not really genre, the style of modernism. So definitely would recommend it. And in fact, after reading that, I decided I wanted to read Hemingway's other novels. So I've started listening to Farewell to Arms as well, which I'm not too far in it yet, but it's in progress, and I'll probably finish that within the next month or two. And I am really enjoying it in its own way. On top of those books, I've also started listening to Jane Eyre. One of my coworkers and friends, we're talking. He was reading a lot of Jane Austen works recently, Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice. I read Sense and Sensibility last year, and so we discussed that on our coffee breaks, and it was a book I really enjoyed. He really enjoyed it as well, and he said he'd recently read Jane Eyre as well, and Jane Eyre is actually one that I've never read, surprisingly, having made it this far in my life. So I finally decided, you know what, I want to read Jane Eyre. It's time. It's one of those books that you've got to read, and I've started listening to it. I'm listening to the audiobook version of it, which is really nicely narrated. I forget who the narrator is on this version, but it's the Spotify version, the Spotify recording of Jane Eyre, and really enjoying it. I like the contrast that I'm seeing between Jane Eyre. I'm only about a quarter of the way into the novel so far, but we've just met Mr. Rochester. Don't really know anything about him yet, other than that he is the owner of this place where Jane Eyre has become governess, and presumably we're going to see much more of him and get to meet him as the novel progresses. But I like Jane Eyre is interesting. The style of it is just it's a very different, I shouldn't say very different, but it is there's a real contrast between the sort of like there's some of this melodramatic style, some sensational style to Jane Eyre that isn't quite there in Jane Austen's work. So Jane Austen has a little bit of this feel of satire, this feeling of tongue-in-cheek comments that by a sort of third-person narrator that is seeing into the characters' minds and sort of highlighting their contradictions. We don't see so much of that in Jane Eyre, even though Brontë is describing a very similar society to what we see in Jane Austen. But in Jane Eyre, there's more of it's a very personal, it's told from the perspective, a first person's perspective of Jane. And you see how she's a very imaginative girl, how she, having grown up reading books and that being her way of being exposed to the broader world outside of the narrow world in which she lives. She has this huge imagination, and she imagines supernatural events like a ghost or this monster dog that she imagines is approaching her when Mr. Rochester is first when she first meets him in the night outside of the estate. And it gives the novel this style that is in some ways less reminiscent of something like Jane Austen and more reminiscent of like Wilkie Collins' The Woman in White, which I read last year, which has this sort of it feels as if there's something supernatural going on at times because the character's imagination just grows so vivid that it almost occupies like a larger-than-life place in the story, even though presumably there are actually no ghosts in the house that Jane Eyre has come to, and she's not actually hearing the laughing or the whatever expressions of like some person who died in this bedroom or anything like that. But we'll see. Maybe I'm just ignorant of what is actually to come. So those are the older classics I've been enjoying. And then a few more books that I've read or listened to this summer are some contemporary fiction. One of those being Beautiful World, Where Are You? By Sally Rooney. Sally Rooney has written 3 novels at this point. The most famous of them, I think, still being Normal People, which was actually adapted recently, maybe not super recently at this point, into a TV show, which I didn't actually watch, but I did read Normal People, and I liked it. It was stylistically very interesting to me. The tone of it was very interesting. I can't even exactly put my finger on what it was that I liked about it at times, or I couldn't before thinking about it and thinking back to it in contrast with this next novel that I've read. But I really enjoyed that story of two friends since childhood who have sort of an on and off relationship with one another and trust each other very deeply, but also have some personal issues that prevent them from really becoming close to one another. And it's really I don't even know what the word is for it. It's it feels like a genuine and I would say touching book, even though there's a lot of ambiguity in it that remains throughout the novel and even to the very end. It feels genuine in part because of that. So Beautiful World, Where Are You? As soon as I started listening to it, it brought back some of the parts of Sally Rooney's style that I like the most. She has this way of capturing the conversations between characters and just the sort of inner attention and over-analysis of themselves and of other people that especially millennials have when interacting with one another, and sort of the way that communication, sort of the awkwardness of communication in modern times. So Beautiful World, Where Are You? Centers on the stories of 2 women who were friends in college and who are still very good friends. I think they're each other's best friends, Eileen and Alice. And their relationships with 2 men in their lives. One, Felix, is Alice's boyfriend or friend of sorts who she's just met through a dating app. And then another, Simon, is Eileen's long-term friend since childhood and romantic interest. And Beautiful World, Where Are You? Is, I think, a more ambitious novel than Normal People in that it takes on these 2 relationships and the intersection between them through the link of Alice and Eileen, the 2 main female characters. But also in other ways, it seems as if it's attempting to say some broader point about the state of the world that we live in, which is evident from the very title of the book, Beautiful World, Where Are You? There are these interludes in which the characters, Alice and Eileen, write letters to one another, which feels fairly contrived. Actually, there are these long letters that really often veer into musings that have almost nothing to do with the rest of the events of the novel, and kind of, I would say, if they achieve anything, it's to portray a sort of disillusionment of these main characters with modern life in Ireland or just in the world. And this question of whether there is a beautiful world that we live in or not. And the answer is yes, but like only because there's this weird scene in which the characters are, I think, sitting outside in some nature environment, and one of them remarks it's a beautiful world. So I guess that's the answer. But anyway, there was a lot here to like in A Beautiful World, Where Are You, specifically in the way that the character dynamics are portrayed, but maybe because of the length of this novel, or maybe also just because even those character dynamics feel a bit repetitive after a while, I felt that even this best aspect of Beautiful World, Where Are You, the way in which it realistically portrays these interactions between characters, even that felt like it was weaker to me than in Normal People. And maybe part of that also is because of the fact that there's these two central couples and a central friendship as well that are portrayed in this novel, which gives less attention to each individual one. And then these letters that the characters write to one another just feel really out of place and superficial in a way that, like, I'm willing to admit, or I'm willing to leave open the possibility that there is something more profound here that Rooney is doing, but I'm skeptical. Like, it seems to me that these characters are just having these superficial conversations and speculating about some things that we've never really, that most of us never think about, like the Bronze Age collapse. I won't go into details there, but it causes some anxiety for these characters. And also some things that we've thought about a lot that are not really that profound or that well fleshed out in these like pseudo essays that are in this novel. So the result is that it almost feels like Rooney's just put these essays by herself into the middle of the novel, except also I like to think that if Rooney was writing an essay, that it would be better than what these young people are writing, because it feels like maybe it is an authentic portrayal of the kind of thoughts that we have in our 20s and 30s, especially in our 20s, in our college years or beyond, slightly beyond, like sort of beginning to understand or beginning to see the complexity and the contradictions and the, like, sometimes just bizarreness of the world and many things that we see that are wrong with it, and trying to understand these in simple terms, or, I mean, maybe not even simple terms. I wouldn't characterize these characters' conversations as simplistic, but I would characterize them as incomplete and still a bit naive, all of that is to say that Beautiful World, Where Are You? I found it a frustrating novel, and I can't say that I really enjoyed it in the way that I enjoyed Normal People. There were these little bits of it that I enjoyed, but it honestly made me not feel like I want to go and now read Rooney's first work, Conversations with Friends. I might at some point, but like this didn't really inspire me. Like, if anything, I'd rather just go back and read Normal People and see what was there. But a lot of people do enjoy this book and enjoy really all of Rooney's works, so that's just my 2 cents. Another book that I read, also by another Irish writer, was Prophet Song by Paul Lynch, which was the winner of the 2023 Booker Prize. So the last year's Booker Prize, which was announced, I want to say, at the very end of last year, 2023. And I wasn't necessarily seeking to read this book, but I was at the library picking up some, just kind of scanning around and looking for stuff to read on a vacation. And I saw this one at the front, and I thought, sure, I'll give it a try. So Prophet Song deals with, I wouldn't call it even a future Ireland. I think I'd call it a contemporary Ireland, but like a alternate reality Ireland. Like you could imagine it being an Ireland that is 3 years from now or something like that, where, a police state is taking over and the society is basically descending into like all out war. Like these characters go from, understanding that something weird is going on, that the new government is becoming a totalitarian regime, it progresses into a state of like actual civil war. It's incredibly unsafe for the main character and her family to live here. So the main character, Eilish, is a woman, a scientist by profession, who lives in, oh gosh, I don't actually know what the city is, but it's a city in Ireland. I'm not sure if it's Dublin or gosh, I don't even know if the city is specified, but it's a city in Ireland. And the book starts with her husband being taken away by this, like basically the secret police that are in charge of this new government. And, things only get worse as the novel goes on. And she has 4 kids, ranging in age from a newborn who is really fully dependent on her to teenage, maybe even almost an adult son who, is at the age where he is really expected to serve in the military under this new regime. And I think these characters and the way Eilish sees her family struggling, and she struggles herself to help them make it through this new environment, an environment that sneaks up on them so quickly that it takes them a while to even process what's going on. That dynamic is the best thing about this novel, and something that I enjoyed. As a whole, I didn't really enjoy this book that much, which a lot of people, obviously there are a lot of people that loved it. It won the Booker Prize award. And I'm not sure entirely how much my gripes are just like personal gripes, or, I have heard others express the same things and not liking it, but I don't know if they're just like a personal preference or what. But the whole political situation in this novel, like in seeing reviewers talk about this book, there's a lot of people who say that this novel is beautiful because it really captures the modern predicaments that we're in today. And I disagree. Actually, I don't disagree, but I just feel like that is this big catch-all statement that actually means like nothing. This novel is, the author himself said that it was inspired by the events of the Syrian civil war, which some have criticized this novel for basically saying, if it's about the Syrian civil war, then why didn't we just have it take place in Syria? Like it's centering that conflict in Ireland instead, so that Irish people will relate to it, and like it feels uncomfortable, I guess, to say that people will relate more to an Irish protagonist than they will to a Syrian protagonist. And yet, even though that's uncomfortable, I think there is truth to it. I'm not sure how my experience of it was influenced, like whether I decided to read it or not, or how I perceived the book. I don't know. I don't know if I felt more sympathetic for the main characters because they were, living in a Western society. If I was Irish myself, maybe I would especially have more sympathy or more would be able to relate more easily to the main characters. But I know that some people have expressed, like, for better or for worse, they found it easier to relate to this scenario happening in a Western democracy instead of in a country that people in their minds imagine as a place where such events are likely to happen, whether that's through a real deep understanding or just sort of a stereotyping. And to Paul Lynch's credit, I don't feel like this novel is too heavy-handed. I don't feel like it's trying to be too heavy-handed. I don't feel like he's trying to wave it out and say, look, this is the modern state that we're in. Like, this is the everything that is wrong with the society today, and this is what Ireland is going to look like in 2 years. Like, even listening to his interviews, I'm pretty confident that he is not trying to achieve that, and he's not trying to make this book have some, like, inherent message to it. I think he wants the message to emerge to readers from the writing itself in a way that it differs for different readers. And also, to his credit, he doesn't really go into details about the political situation and exactly what it was that led this government. Like, he doesn't basically spell out, like, oh, hey, this government that exists now in 2023, that's the government that in 3 years is going to be this, like, police state. He's not interested in pointing fingers, so to speak, at specific modern political parties or institutions, even if there are maybe some subtle connections there or subtle views into what the politics of this new regime might be like. But because of that, like, while I appreciate Lynch's ambiguity in creating the state, for me, that ambiguity and the lack of a clear progress from point A to point B made the state not really even feel like Ireland at all. Like if you read 1984, a novel that surely this novel, Prophet Song, has been and will be compared to many times, in 1984 it takes place in Britain, but it's a different enough world. Like, it's the world of 1984 as envisioned in 1948. There is plenty of time for changes to happen. There's not a clear connection between the day that the novel was written and the future that it portrays. And therefore, you can see it as a society existing within the present political region of Britain, but also being like a different Britain than the one that its readers were familiar with. For me, it was just very hard to find this Ireland real at all. Like, maybe part of it is that I've never been to Ireland, but it just felt like it didn't have to be Ireland other than to evoke this sense that this is a Western society. I don't mean to say that it doesn't look like Ireland in its like obviously this is the society of Ireland that we're looking at, but it was just too big of a leap for me to make. Like, maybe people will inform me that this is just my naivete about Irish politics. Like, I certainly don't. I'm certainly not aware of many important aspects that are unique about Irish history that actually, like, where people did sort of just disappear and never come back, like during the Troubles. I'm not familiar with all that, and I feel like because of that it may have a different impact for the Irish audience than for me. But it didn't feel as real and vivid to me as I think it did for many readers. And part of it, I think, was because of this lack of clarity about how this even happened. But another reason why it didn't feel very real to me is because of the way that it's written. And maybe this was intentional on the part of the author, because the writing style is somewhat bizarre. I think that's another criticism that many readers have had of this book. Aside from the readers who really enjoyed it. And many people did find the writing style very captivating and really loved this book. But the way that it's written is it's very choppy, and it feels very disjointed. It's very disorienting, and not just in like a foreboding, ominous way. Like there are passages that create this ominous sense of fear of not knowing what's happening next. But what I mean is that there's just these passages that it's following sort of the stream of consciousness of our character Eilish, and it's really hard to even follow. Like I found this book very hard to read, just because like my mind was not able to keep up with the jumps that it's just a very jarring style in which it's written. And on one hand, maybe this sense of unreality is an intended effect of the author. Like I'm sure that he has an intention and a purpose for the way that he's doing it. And maybe even the sense of unreality for me corresponds to the sense, like Eilish, as this was all happening around her, despite that she was experiencing it and seeing the violence and the terror of those around her, it still feels like if the society I'm living in all of a sudden turned into this police state, I'm sure that I would adapt to it, but I think I would have a hard time processing it in a way that would make it feel sort of unreal, or as if like it's all just sort of a dream that I'm living in, like a bad dream. But that said, even if there is some skill in this narrative technique, it made it frustrating for me to read, and I didn't really find it particularly enjoyable, and I found it really hard to push through to the very end. So for me, not really my favorite. I actually, of the two Booker Prize nominees for last year that I've read, this and Western Lane by Chetna Maroo, I personally preferred Western Lane by Chetna Maroo quite a bit more, which is it's quite a short novel, and I'd recommend reading it if you have a chance. Actually, I would recommend finding out what it's about and finding a little bit about the style of it, and then seeing if you'd like it, because actually I don't think everyone will like it. But I respect the author for what was being done here, but I think the whole conversation around it, and maybe I'm just a little bit frustrated or a little bit oversensitive to modern reviewers trying to take out political messages or draw connections to modern political situations that are so open-ended that you can make whatever connection you want. I find that a little bit frustrating, that this is how the book's being received, even though it's kind of inevitable. I can't really blame the author for that either. But in spite of that, I still kind of struggled with this book. One sort of contemporary fiction, I guess it's already kind of at the state of contemporary classic, though, because it's 50 years old. One that I did enjoy was Play It As It Lays by Joan Didion. And I have a whole separate review that I've already recorded about this one, and it will hopefully be coming out soon, so I won't say too much about it. Other than that, I finished this book really quickly. I read it, in 3 sittings, 3 evenings. Came home from work, read for an hour or two, and then did that for a few days, and very immersive writing style. Joan Didion's writing style is so captivating, and in my review of that book, I'll talk about why I wouldn't recommend this book for everyone, because the content in it is not really everyone's cup of tea. But for me, it was just a wonderful novel to read, and I'm really glad that I finally read it. I've had a copy of it sitting around for 2 years now at this point, so I was glad to finally get to it. And then finally, on top of that, I've been reading a few books related to German history, which I've read a couple of them in the past. I mentioned The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, and what was the one? I think it was just called Germany and New Nationalism, by Helmut Walser Smith. So I've learned a little bit about Germany's history, but I'm interested in learning some more about it. That can be a topic for a different time, and I won't get into everything that I'm reading right now, but hopefully once I finish some of those books, I can mention them in my next one of these videos, if I leave enough time for it. So that's about all I've got for today. Thanks for sitting through this slower paced discussion, and I hope these reflections are enjoyable, even though I like doing the dedicated and more polished book reviews, but it's also fun just to talk about a lot of books that, honestly, I'm not going to have time to do reviews of all of them, but I like discussing them, and it's part of why I made this YouTube channel. So hope you've all been having some good reading as well, and let me know what you've been reading, or if you've read any of these and had any reactions to my own reactions about these books. And hopefully I'll see you again soon. Bye, and happy reading.